Sorry, everybody. My name is Patrick Milliken from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I was trying to get the YouTube and the Facebook synced up, not terribly well, but we are live and we're delighted to have two authors with us today. Alison Montclair, AKA Alan Gordon.
Hi.
It's a brand new book, The Unkept Woman. And he signed a whole batch of books for us and they're on their way to us right now. I'll go ahead and put a link in the comments field if you'd like to purchase one. And our friend Ashley Weaver has a brand new book, The Key to Deceit. And she also has signed some books for us. Let's see if I can find it. Here we go. And I'll go ahead and put a link to that book in the comments field too. And if you have questions for Alan/Allison or Ashley, go ahead and put them in and Barbara will bring me back on screen towards the end of the hour. So Barbara in Santa Fe, over to you.
Yay. Thank you very much. I'm hoping I won't be gagging because this fireplace behind me has had many wood fires in it and the ashes are, I'm telling you guys, this must have been like the Great Fog of London, back during the warriors in the 50s, but I'll survive. So Ashley is the author of the Avery Ames series and has now leapt forward to 1940 London with her second book for Electra MacDonald, who comes from a family of locksmiths, which leads them into secret work in the war effort, which is a lot of fun. And I just got an email from a fan, AJ Finn, whose second book one day we might actually see. If you're watching this, AJ, I hope you're going to update us. And here's what he has to say about Ashley. He wanted to share this. I read Ashley's Amory Ames books, as well as the first Electra, and my mother has read all of them. I haven't yet read Alison's series. My mother has, but imagine my surprise, though, on reading your email blast, that Alison Montclair is none other than Alan Gordon.
What?
I've been trying to track him down for years. I read The Parisian Prodigal in London back in like 2010 or something, and then I circled back to the rest. So AJ has sent us a photo of a new fan for you, Alan, and your first book for Fest the Fool.
Oh, oh, nice.
The 13th Night was one of the most original mysteries I've ever read. Wonderful historical play on Shakespeare, fabulous characters, wonderful dialogue. How many did you write, Alan?
8 of the books, and then there were 4 short stories floating around.
Well, I can't recommend them highly enough. So thank you, Patrick, and thank you, AJ, for sharing that with us. He didn't send us a dog photo for you, Ashley. I'm really sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
But I thought it was fun nonetheless. So, normally I do this alphabetically by author, but I really think that makes more sense if we do this chronologically, because your book is in 1940, Alison. And Alan, I'm not even going to try. No, let me try it again. Ashley, Alison's too hard.
They're all A's.
Yeah.
Anyway, Alan, aka Alison's book is in 1946 London. So I think it'd make more sense if we take the earlier one first, right? So I know, Ashley, that we've talked about your first Electra MacDonald, but why don't you go back and remind us why you decided to jump forward in time and create a new character after Avery Ames, who was a really popular series?
Well, I was doing a lot of reading of World War II nonfiction, and I just kind of got in a phase where I was reading a lot of books, and I read a book called Agent Zigzag by Ben Mcintyre, which is about a man named Eddie Chapman, who was kind of a petty thief criminal, and he was imprisoned on the Channel Islands when the Nazis eventually occupied them, and they told him they would let him out of prison if he would spy for them. So they took him out, sent him to spy school, taught him how to parachute, and parachuted him into London. And he immediately went to the authorities and said, the Nazis want me to spy on you. Do you want me to spy on them? And so he became a double agent. So when I was reading that, I absolutely loved the book. And it was such a fascinating story about a criminal who had been on the wrong side of the law before the war, and then decided that he wanted to, use his skills, his illicit skills for his country. So that's kind of where the seed of Electra MacDonald started. She and her family are locksmiths by day and safecrackers by night, but they end up being able to use those skills for the British war effort.
Well, those are really, yeah, I can see that they are really useful skills. I just read Rhys Bowen's new book called Where the Sky Begins, And she has a very moving picture, both of you might enjoy it, about a working class woman in London whose life isn't really anything wonderful. And then the Blitz starts and the bombs come down. And while her husband is off fighting, the husband she's kind of sorry she married, she's under a table and her entire house and everything she owned is wiped out. And she's evacuated from London up to around Peterborough. But what's interesting about it, A, she's not a child evacuee, but B, it's the most astonishing portrait of how really awful life was for civilians. I mean, I remember Robert Harris, when he wrote Enigma, pointed out that nobody was ever clean because there wasn't any soap. Often there wasn't any hot water. Dental care was like, forget it. And I think there's so many glamorous stories about the war, or, people doing amazing things. We forget just how hard it was for people to soldier on just every day. And, I think you did a good job with Electra in pointing out just how hard it was for everybody. But at the same time, everybody wants to do their bit, whatever that bit might happen to be.
Right. Definitely. Yeah, I really enjoyed bringing Electra's skills to the forefront, and kind of she's sort of, as the series progresses, trying to find this balance of where she wants to go in the future, as so many people were during the war, not knowing what the life will hold for you when the war is over, and how the war is going to end. And so she's kind of grappling with all that, as well as whether she wants to pursue her criminal career once all this is over, or if she wants to sort of turn over a new leaf.
That's tragically, that is what they're looking at in the Ukraine, because until you know how the war ends, you can't figure out what your life will actually be. So I'm sad that what you're writing about actually has a parallel today. So Alan, you're in 1946, the war is over, and now you're wrestling with that very question. What are Iris Sparks and her friend Gwen Bainbridge, Gwendolyn, what are they going to do with their lives?
Well, it's getting to the point, the business is settling in a little bit, but their personal lives are getting more unsettled, I would say. And they seem to be moving in different tracks because Gwen, who started off prior to the series, she had come out of an asylum, basically. She had cracked up when her husband died, and she's trying to put her life back together. And she's slowly reclaiming it. Iris, on the other hand, seems to be falling apart a little bit more and more. And one thing that has happened in the way the book starts is she had broken up with a married man she'd been having an affair with while she had been a spy during the war. And he's come back, basically to reclaim the apartment he had set up for the two of them. And she doesn't want to leave. She already has another boyfriend. She doesn't want him there, except that it turns out that she not only can't escape him, but there are things involving her past as a spy that she can't escape either. And that's how the mystery starts coming into it.
So a matrimonial bureau, I think a tagline for this book is matrimony and murder. Why did you decide that a marriage bureau, a matrimonial bureau, would be an interesting occupation for these two women?
It was for Iris, it was an impulse. The backstory is that they met at a wedding where they each had something to do with getting the bride and groom together. And Gwen's challenge for matching people, and Iris is for making sure that they don't have any skeletons in their closet, because she knows all sorts of people in the criminal and police and intelligence worlds that she can draw upon for information. So it becomes sort of a natural fit for the two of them. Plus, they just enjoy each other's company, and they have that impulse of meddling in people's lives, which every amateur detective needs.
I thought that the premise in The Right Sort of Man, which is the first of the four books in the Sparks and Bainbridge series, of which The Unkept Women is the fourth, became particularly poignant when Prince Philip died. Of course, you couldn't know that, although he certainly was, well up in years when you wrote the book. I wish we could talk about it without spoiling it, but I did think that you got them off to an interesting start by bringing in the royal family as a client.
Yeah, that was fun. I had wanted to do that in the second book, just because in the timeline 1946 is when they became engaged at Balmoral. And I thought, having started my series in June, I thought, oh, they're going to get engaged this fall. I better get going if I want to use that world at all. So I brought them into the second book and ended up having a lot of fun and learning quite a bit about them. And then he passed away not long after the book came out, which was an odd juxtaposition.
It was. Actually, I misspoke. It's a royal affair, the second book, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. So tell us about The Right Sort of Man. What was the premise there?
Well, the premise of The Right Sort of Man was when the two of them started up the agency, and it was very unusual for women to be running any kind of business back then. But there was in the real world, there was an actual marriage agency that started up pre-war by two women, which was sort of the inspiration for this, but using it as a mystery milieu. And I wanted to set it in the post-war period because I thought that was a fascinating period, for one thing, when everybody was recovering. And a lot of it, the recovery involved trying to get their lives back together. So it was a good sort of metaphor for the individual women, as well as for what London was going through, what England was going through. And
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I didn't want to write a wartime set of mysteries, because I was sort of interested in dealing with people who were recovering, who were traumatized. And there was nothing, I thought, really written about the women who were traumatized during the war. You see lots about the men, and men suffering from this and that, the other thing. But there were many women who were equally traumatized for one reason or another, whether they had participated as in the military or whether they had just tried to keep calm and carry on at home while the men were off.
Well, I mean, there's an obvious throwback here to Dorothy Sayers, because Harriet Vane, in fact, worked for a company run by women. And that was instrumental in part in her survival of her murder trial and subsequent relationship with Lord Peter. But both of you, I think, and Ashley, maybe you're a little bit more, because at the time, there's a lot of parallels to Jacqueline Winspear and Maisie Dobbs. In Electra and Maisie are kind of similarly placed in the war effort at this point, aren't they?
Right. Yes. And it's really interesting setting it during the war, because there were so many opportunities for women that they hadn't had before the war, in the terms of, filling these places that were left by men who were off fighting. And so Electra, her family, she's raised by her uncle, and she has two male cousins, and she's sort of grown up as one of the boys, and she's been trained by her uncle in the locksmithing job that they do legitimately, in addition to the safe cracking that they do. So she was ready for this opportunity when, the war forced women into a lot of roles that they hadn't been able to participate in before. So she stepped up, and she's ready to go, and she's got those skills, and she's ready to use them.
But there is sorry, I don't know where this strange noise keeps coming from. If it's me, I apologize. But nonetheless, there has to be a mysterious man, in your case, a Major Ramsey, who, there always has to be somebody that's recruiting people in unusual occupations to into the war effort. So who did you base Major Ramsey on? Is he just purely imaginative, or did you have somebody in mind?
I didn't have anybody particular in mind. I knew I wanted somebody who was kind of course, that straight-laced by the book, sort of he's very no nonsense, and sort of it contrasts with Electra's personality and of course her whole lifestyle. She's very ready to go rogue and do whatever she needs to do, and he's more set in his ways. So there's kind of that little bit of conflict between them, but there was nobody in particular. I just kind of had an idea of who his character was going to be and how it was going to fit in with the whole picture.
I think he's a fascinating character. And then we always wonder, whether there will be any kind of romance or whether he's just a useful character. I don't know to what degree somebody in Ellie's position could actually do something without a support group.
Right. It's definitely, in the case of Ellie's family, it comes in handy because her family has a lot of criminal connections. And so that's something that comes into play a little bit more in this book, although it was a little bit in the first book too. They know different people with different skill sets who are able to do kind of things outside the bounds of the law. And so that comes in handy. Major Ramsey has his group of individuals who work with him and help him in his missions, but Ellie and her family connections come in very handy for him in the jobs that they're trying to do.
So it's difficult to write British crime without talking to some extent about class. So Alan, you get to explore it really through Gwen Bainbridge, because she's married into a wealthy and aristocratic family. And that's part of the reason that she's having such a hard time after her husband was killed.
That's right. She part of what happens to her and then ongoing stories that she was declared a ward of the state when she cracked up, and her in-laws took over her 6-year-old son, and who was also presumably the heir to their fortune at some point, although he's only 6 right now. So she's spending a great deal of time trying to get herself restored. There's been an ongoing storyline of her trying to reclaim her status in court. Back then, they had a lovely title for the courts that dealt with people in her situation, the courts of lunacy. They're actually called that, to my absolute horror and secret delight, up through 1947. So I had to research them. I'm getting to be dealing with them more in the 5th book. Fortunately, in one of the things that happens in the current books, she's finally getting a lawyer involved. So things are progressing. I had a great deal of fun writing that scene, because here is a person trying to convince a lawyer that, investigating murders is not the act of an insane woman. It was difficult for her to do that.
So part of the problem is that there is property involved, because she has a young son, and because her dead husband was the heir to this family. It seems to me that the courts of lunacy, we could go all the way back to Wilkie Collins here, couldn't we, and The Woman in White? The courts of lunacy were a really useful tool for families that did not want money and property to move away.
Oh, it had been weaponized pretty much from the start, which was somewhere in the 1840s, I think, was when it really started getting going. Yeah, and it was particularly weaponized against women, because it was sort of the way the courts and the way the field of psychiatry, which barely existed until the latter part of the 1800s, the way they viewed women was much different than the way they viewed men. And it all tied into basically keeping them from controlling things. And it was abused very heavily, certainly in England, probably in other places as well. So that's been a running theme in Gwen's life. So I'm examining that. And one of the things that we learn is that, among other things, that the very reason she can be in business is she has a legal guardian who had to sign off on it and give her permission to enter into contracts for something simple like, helping people find spouses. So that's going on as well. So she's in danger every time she goes out to investigate something, because it could come back to be used against her if she pushes things in court.
Well, you created an interesting conflict between the two women, because Iris, who is so unconventional, is actually very free, other than whatever restraints that the Official Secrecy Act put on her, because that's real. And it's amazing how people really stuck to the Official Secrets Act, for decades after the war. But I do think that there's an interesting tension between the two women, in that Gwen, has to be so much more circumspect, and yet her life may be going in a better track than Iris, who is freer, but right now her life is kind of going off the rails. So what fun for you.
Yes.
Right. So Ashley, Ellie, because you've put her, she's not of an upper class, she doesn't have all of those kinds of considerations, but because her family has been engaged in, to some degree, criminal enterprise, what kind of bounds does that put on her?
It definitely puts some restrictions on her. In some ways, she's been freer because of the way her family has incorporated her into their activities, and the way she's part of the criminal gang, so to speak. But also in terms of, you mentioned, like, if there's any there's a little bit of maybe romantic tension between her and Major Ramsey, but he comes from a very wealthy aristocratic family. He's the nephew of an earl. And so, she's very aware of that class distinction between them, and it kind of the boundary it puts there, and the way, of course, the way she's been raised is very, very different from the way that he's been brought up. And so there's a little bit of conflict in that.
Isn't it interesting that the OSS recruited so many people from, if you want to call it, middle to upper class Americans, and much of the sort of East Coast Ivy League school thing. But if you look at a lot of the British Secret Service, it was the same thing, wasn't it? That it was the officer class, or people like Ian Fleming. I'm trying to remember, what was the, hang on while I yell out the window. Rob, what was the name of the movie that we just watched about with Ian Fleming had a role in it? It was a wartime, what was it? Do you remember? Okay, both of us are having short-term memory loss because we're so old, but anyway.
It's hard to do it on the spot. I can never remember on the spot.
Well, we watched it 2 or 3 weeks ago, but I thought it really illustrated the point I was just making, that the people running the intelligence services were mostly of an upper class and a type, but they were perfectly okay using people like like Ellie, and
right.
people of a different and in fact, people like Ellie probably had more useful skills if you really think about it.
Right, definitely skills. The kind of skills you needed. That's what I found so fascinating about that book about Eddie Chapman was, when it really came down to it, it was somebody who knew how to kind of skirt the law and do things in a less maybe honorable way that were really ideally suited to that type of work.
The movie, it's Operation Mincemeat. Thank you,
yes.
Patrick. That's
another book by Ben Mcintyre. That's an excellent book as well.
Yeah, but it was this terrific con that the British ended up running on the Germans as to where the invasion would be, whether it be in Sicily or whether it would be Greece. And I won't go into it, but it's an amazing performance that would be impossible today, wouldn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, but just so astonishingly well done. So Ellen, one of the reasons that I so love Test the Fool and that whole series is you're a master of satire. You're very sly, and this Sparks and Bainbridge, you have that same voice, which is how I identified you before you actually got outed as the author here. But you really do love that sort of kind of tongue-in-cheek or slightly satirical voice, don't you? Is that your natural voice?
Probably. I think they're funnier than I am. I think part of it is, that in both books, there are people who are sort of rebelling against class structures quite a bit, the roles that are imposed on them. So one of the things they use both as defenses and as weapons is the humor. It's commentary, it's a way of bonding with each other. It's showing just sort of a common take on the world. And it's something I enjoy doing, sure. I like to think I'm a funny person that can make other people laugh. Hopefully it works out.
Well, one of the great things about a novelist is that riposte that you want to make in actual conversation, you can do it in a book.
Yeah. I'm probably taking out a lot of things and people I wish I had thought of saying this to, at the time, and think, okay, this character will now be a book and I will get at them,
Go back and add that snappy comeback later on. I like that.
So Ashley, what did you have to do to change the voice from Avery Ames to Ellie McDonald? Are you conscious that you made a switch in choice of language and tone? How'd you do it?
Yes, a little bit, because Amory, she lives in early 1930s London, but she's a lot more sophisticated, and she belongs to a sort of higher social class than Ellie, and so her voice is a little more maybe formal and things like that. So when I made the switch to Ellie, at first I had to consciously pay attention to the kind of the phrases I was using, the even like little bits of slang and things. I had to kind of go in and sort of adapt to Ellie's voice. Now that I've been doing it a little longer, it flows a little bit more easily, but every once in a while I'll catch myself reading a line and I'm like, oh, that sounds a little bit more like Amory than Ellie, so I kind of have to change it up. But for the most part, it shifted over pretty easy. I think because they're such different women that it kind of made it a little bit easier, because both books are first person. So I think that's kind of helped in terms of kind of getting in their heads and letting them sort of speak the way that it comes naturally to them.
So Alan, you chose to write third person, or haven't you consistently written? I can't remember. Was first or third?
Was first person for the most part. Sometimes
Okay.
it was multiple first person. Yeah, no, that was a big change for me, and it was a conscious choice because I wanted to have different viewpoints expressed, but also you can jump into the sort of third person thinking for characters too. So it was a very flexible way of writing it, and I found that it allowed me to go to a lot of places, switch between the two characters, or occasionally jump to other characters when I needed to Sally or to Archie or one of the others. So yeah, I think at the same time I have less of an author voice. Occasionally the author will sneak in a little comment in a description, but it's not like the author becomes a narrator as well. So it was a nice balance. I think the tone has been pretty good overall for what I'm trying to do.
So both of you have interesting, jobs. I mean, writing is not the only thing that you do, and I haven't really asked you about that. So Ashley, you're in Louisiana. What's your professional background?
I'm a librarian. So I work at a public library here in Louisiana. And
Nice.
yeah, right now I'm in technical services, sort of doing I do book ordering and cataloging and that kind of thing. So I really enjoy that. I always say I get my hands on the books before anybody else. So I always get first dibs.
So is the library in general sympathetic with your authorial career?
Oh, definitely. They're all very supportive and very excited. And it's really, the two professions flow very well together, I think. So it's been great.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how many librarians become authors, or in the case of the Poison Pen, how many librarians become booksellers, since we have so many of them. The hardest part of that is switching them from giving everything away to actually
Right.
selling the books. But we've managed. Alan, you have a background. Are you a lawyer? I know you work in a legal aid operation.
Yeah, I'm a public defender in New York City. So large part of writing for me is escaping from my own life. Just to go somewhere else into a world I have a little more control over. So that's good. And then also I meet a tremendous number of people, and that nobody's ever directly translated into any characters in the books because that would not be right. But every now and then I'll stumble across a little trait or quirk or something like that. Well, I think, okay, that's something I can incorporate. So it's a good people meeting kind of area.
Well, there's some nice parallels between you two, but one of which is that each of you is embarked on a second series. But I never like to assume that authors appearing together on our Poison Pen event schedule have read each other's books. But just on the off chance that you are familiar with each other's books, what would you like to ask each other, or if anything? Ashley, is there anything you want to talk to Alan about?
I don't know. I didn't come prepared.
No,
I
it's
have to
okay.
think about it for a minute.
I wasn't putting you on the spot, but sometimes I assume that it's only me that has the questions, and then afterward I realized I made a mistake. Alan, have you had a chance to look at Ashley's book?
I just read A Key to Deceit. I got an author advanced copy. And I guess, the standard question that you'd be asked is how much of yourself is in the lead character, how much is wish fulfillment, how much is I want to write somebody as far away from me as I can possibly get.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think I'm very similar to Ellie or to Emery for that matter. I'm sure a little bit of me slips in since it's in first person and, it's kind of coming out of my head through their filters. But I would say Ellie's a lot more spunky than I am, and she's a lot more daring than I am. I'm kind of your typical homebody librarian. So of course, if I was placed in that situation where I had to use my skills to do something, a little bit more brave and heroic, who knows what would happen. But
You learned to pick lock?
I bought a lock-picking kit online when I started writing the series, and my goal was to get really expert at it so I could do really impressive demonstrations, but it never came about. I've still got the kit, so maybe one of these days I'll be an expert at it. But
So I guess an obvious question would be, since both of you are American, why did you decide to write British crime, and why did you decide to write historical crime? I'm not sure if those are the same question or two different questions, but Alan, I mean, you obviously loved historical fiction because Fess the Fool was, definitely historical. What drew you to, post-war London?
Well, it was again the learning about the real setting and the real venture, and then again transposing it from pre-war to post-war was sort of the major historical choice I made. And again, that was just that to me is a fascinating time. So the war is ending, but the Cold War is beginning, and a lot of other things are beginning that I want to dive into. The collapse of the British Empire is coming, and it's just one thing after another. So I just can pull out the the year by year almanac and just say, okay, I want something said here. I want something said here. This book, I ended up going in a completely different direction than what I had planned, because my original idea is I wanted to tie it into the premiere of a play on Inspector Calls, which is a play I like, the J.B. Priestley play. And that was in October 46. But the more I researched that particular period, I started seeing all these stories about Polish resettlement. There's a vast number of displaced Polish refugees in England at the time. And that started taking over what I wanted to write about. And then I stumbled across a few other things. So I want to incorporate that. I want to incorporate this. So just the research, little things will pop up and say, okay, this would make a good setting or a good way of killing somebody. I was looking for a fun way to do that. It is part of the fun. I never know what I'm going to be writing about until I do the research, and that's, I think that just stimulates my brain.
So the obvious lesson we draw from that is that you really love to do research, and, writing historical fiction gives you that chance. Ashley, is it the same for you?
I think so. I really enjoy reading historical fiction. And so that's just sort of kind of, I feel like you're really escaping when you're reading historical fiction, because you're not only going to a different place, you're going to a different time and a different way of life. And so that's always kind of drawn me to that as a reader. And then just growing up reading a lot of the Golden Age mysteries, of course, Agatha Christie, things like that. That's why the Amory Ames series ended up setting in 1930s England. And then with the Electra McDonald series, I decided to make her British because, for one reason, is she's working on these kind of locksmithing jobs and things. It's going to be more, urgent, more immediate when she's in London and they're facing the enemy and going through the Blitz and things like that. There's a lot of spies, of course, in England that they're having to track down and that kind of thing. So she fit very well into that world.
Well, I mean, there are always landmines facing you when you're writing not just historical fiction, but about a different country and a different culture. I don't know, you probably, both of you can remember, there was a lot of comment that used to fly around about authors like Elizabeth George and so forth, or even Deborah Crombie early on, being American and writing British, and how could they possibly get it right, and all of that. But that seems to have died down some. But are you sensitive to that? Do you feel like you have to go the extra mile to try to, to be authentically British, even though you're American? Because you don't have American point of view characters, which is one way you can get around going into a new culture, is that you can, send an American into Iceland or an American into something, and then you're excused from, from screwing up. But, have you found that that's a threshold you've had to work to overcome, Ashley?
Sure. I think definitely there's been some challenges, and I'm sure there's been, a few things that have slipped through. My editor is actually from London, so that's nice, because she can catch me if my little little mistakes I make or things like that. But I do try very hard to take notes of even phrases I've used to make sure whether, because sometimes the phrases we use are not the phrases the British would use. So I try to do my research. Of course, it's not 100% foolproof, but try my best.
I've been very careful about trying to make sure I don't use any anachronistic phrases. And then I had a particularly obsessive copy editor on this last book who caught the ones that I missed. I think I dropped the word shrink in there as referring to a psychiatrist, and apparently that didn't come until the 60s from Thomas Pynchon, no less. First person, they had head shrinker, but just to call him a shrink.
Oh,
Crying of Lot 49, turns out.
that's
First time.
interesting.
Yeah. So, and I found a couple of dictionaries of British slang, which are invaluable, which were published in the 40s. One of them was military. So, I know an enormous number of euphemisms for sausages now. I haven't used any of them, but that seems to be an obsession in the military, sausages, but every now and then I like to slip in a little something, to make it fun. But also, again, I will think of a phrase and I think, oh, did they say that then? And you start hitting etymology online or whatever, look for the derivation of anything. And that leads you to one rabbit hole after, and you never write anything after a while.
Well, that's what's so funny is so many times you can, just go to check one word and then you end up, it takes an hour to find out if you're using the right word or not, but it's interesting anyway.
I was actually looking up something on my phone. I hear thunder, so heaven only knows what's going to happen here any minute. But I ran across this amazing book in June, and I have only dipped into it because it's quite thick and I haven't gotten to it. But it's a book by Kate Fox, and it's called Watching the English: The Hidden Rules of English Behavior. And I cannot recommend it enough to both of you because it explains things like, the excessive use of story it's not so much language as behavior and mannerisms. So Kate Fox, Fox, I really recommend it.
Look it up.
I draw upon a few British people just to vet me on things. I just sent off something to somebody I knew on Facebook who likes my stuff I wrote a snooker scene, not snooker. And I wanted to make sure I had it right. And she sent back a number of things that will definitely improve it. So,
well, I have found, traveling in England, for example, I remember walking up to the, in front of the ladies' loo, which right there, you have to get that part right, and saying, are you in line? And they all look at me blankly, and then you have to remember, you have to use the word cue. You can't
yes.
say, are you in line? We all know the obvious things like jumper and sweater and biscuit and cookie and that stuff, but there are so many words that, I do think in many respects we are, what is it? We're divided by a common language, I think is often the case. But it's the meaning attached. It's not the words itself.
Right.
The meaning attached to them, and it keeps evolving. I find every day that there is new language rising out of tech and social media and stuff. Mm-hmm. I had to look up doxing. I have no idea what DOXXING. I'm going, what's that? And but the English must be doing that too, don't you think?
Oh yeah, but nice thing about setting it back in the 40s is that we can ignore all the technology.
Yes.
That's it. Yeah.
Makes it so much easier for people to commit murders when there's not so much technology.
Well, that's absolutely true. Unfortunately, part of the risk was that the police and so forth could get things wrong, although we certainly know that they do here. And another thing that it echoes in the back of Golden Age mystery in that period is the death penalty, because England didn't abolish it. So both of you, that was always the thing about the Golden Age Agatha Christie's or Josephine Tay and so forth, that I point out to people is that, when somebody was caught, it really was off to the hangman. They didn't even mess around with appeals. The judge would put the black cap up there, and you had Ellen, like 2 weeks, I think it was, to lodge any kind of appeal. But his execution was pretty summary after trial.
Right. That's actually part of Ellie's backstory. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's actually part of Ellie's backstory, is her mother was accused of a crime as well. And so that, but that was very true that, once you were found guilty, you were pretty much, going to face the gallows. So
in one of the one of the later Whimsy books, I think it was Busman's Holiday, there's this absolutely beautiful scene at the end where after it's been solved and he's gone, he's sent to prison, is going to seeing the hangman, where Whimsy actually goes to the prison to see him afterwards to basically beg his forgiveness. And you can see the impact on Whimsy himself, which I thought was a really extraordinary moment, because it's usually, okay, we solved it, go bye, and right. To have the detective follow up like that was an amazing thing.
Well, I think justice was swifter for sure, and, more certain, although, as I say, there were certainly mistakes where innocent people were sent to the gallows and the whole bit. But what it really means is that the stakes are higher, I think, in the time periods you're writing about. And I do think that probably heightens it for the reader as well, because so many trials today, criminal trials, are practically mockeries, as we can plainly see unfolding around us every day at the moment. And so there was a certainty involved that I think is very satisfying to people who like mystery, and they like a real resolution to, how the fabric of social justice is torn apart. Patrick, why don't we call you up? And I'm doing that in part because I keep hearing thunder and you may lose me at any moment. So this will be a good time for Patrick to ask questions in case I vanish suddenly. I will say it's been a real pleasure, but I won't be doing it on purpose.
Let's see here. What do we have? There is a question for you, Ashley. It's from Rhonda. And she'd like to know, what is your thought of the audible version of The Key of Deceit? I often wonder if an author feels like the narrator does the book justice.
Yes, the audiobook narrator for, actually she did both the Amory Ames series, except for the first Amory Ames book. And then she's done the Electra McDonald series, and she's fantastic. I've listened to some of it and she does great voices and really brings the characters to life. So she's, Alison Larkin is her name. She's wonderful.
How about you, Alan? Any experience with
the woman who does it for the Sparks and Bainbridge books is great, and I listened to about 2 minutes of her, and then I don't want to listen to it anymore because I have their voices in my head. I don't want them to be replaced by her voice.
Let's see here. You may have already brought this up, but can you tell us a little bit about your next projects?
Well, I've turned in Sparks and Bainbridge 5. I started Sparks and Bainbridge 6, and then the side project is my musical theaters work, which strangely enough I have that too. But I've been working on a crime-based. Eventually it's gonna be 6 short musicals about murder for one evening.
Oh,
Halfway there. Six musicals with 6 different composers because I am insane. But it's been fun so far. It's going to take a lot longer than I thought. It was originally 4, but one of them was based on a Roald Dahl short story and we couldn't get the rights.
Oh,
that sounds fantastic.
Also a former spy, right? Roald Dahl? Yeah.
Ashley, where are you?
I just actually turned in the 3rd Electra McDonald. So I'll be starting on number 4 pretty soon.
So I should point out, since you haven't lost me yet, that this is the same publisher, St. Martin's Minotaur, that both authors are, but you do have different editors, because I've known Alan's editor for forever. Ashley's not so much. But I also wanted to point out that the covers have a very similar palette, even though yours is it's a different style. Yeah, Patrick can show them better than I can because he has better light. But I mean, they're interesting together. I did an Instagram post yesterday of the 2 covers because I thought it was, interesting how they kind of
very complementary.
Yeah.
So AJ Finn has weighed in.
Oh, there he is. Hi, AJ.
Yeah, he's watching on YouTube. Let's see here. He's okay. For Ashley, he says, I remember seeing a peculiar combination in a bookshop and checking that the author was in fact Ashley Weaver of Amory Ames fame. I enjoyed those earlier books hugely, but a peculiar combination looked bigger. It is physically larger, with an Art Deco dust jacket design that I describe as very sophisticated. And to me anyway, it reads like a book with a more sizable potential audience. In launching this new series, were you thinking that you wanted to write a, quote, bigger book?
Not necessarily. I did know there was a lot of potential, of course, with, I set the series at the very beginning of World War II. Well, not the very beginning, but very early on in the war. The first book is set early on, mid-1940, and so they hadn't yet reached the Blitz. So, of course, there's a lot of potential for, as the war develops and things intensify in that area, that there's a lot of opportunities for Electra to be able to use her skills as the war progresses. So in terms of that, I was thinking, there's a lot of different ways that the series could develop and a lot of different things I could do with it. So I was thinking along those lines.
His question for Alan, have you written anything else under a pseudonym? Are you in fact Elena Ferranti?
No, I wish. This was the first time, and it was very strange in the beginning, but it was kind of liberating because I didn't have to worry about a lot of things, like publicity. They had to do it all because I was anonymous. So it was kind of fun just to write and know that people wouldn't be able to figure out who it was, or would try to figure out who it was. Maybe I enjoyed that, and it sort of took my ego out of it, strangely enough, because it was Alison Montclair's work, not Alan Gordon. So I had sort of a quiet pride, as Alison did so well.
Where did that name come from, Alan?
It was a three-way conversation between my agent and my editor and myself. I started off, I think the first name I came up with was Lana, which is an anagram of Alan. So it was either Lana St. Clair or Lana Sinclair, because I wanted her to sound British. And that evolved into Alison Montclair. My agent and I were both from New Jersey. So he said, Montclair, okay, that's a town in New Jersey.
That's really interesting. I love the way names come together. Patrick likes to ask that question, and we have some regular fans who also are really interested in names, aren't they, Patrick?
Yeah. A lot of it has to do with character names. Have you ever found yourself doing a, seek all, replace kind of thing if the character name just doesn't seem to work right?
Oh yeah.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah,
I feel very strongly that oh, go ahead.
No, I'll go ahead. You go first, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, I feel very strongly that the name has to fit the character. So as I've written before, if the character feels off with the name, then I definitely have to try and find something that feels more authentic to the character.
And I did a global replacement. I had one character named Parson, and then I had another character, without thinking about it, who I named something else vaguely religious. I think it was Prior or something like that. And my editor says, no, you can't have them both. And I said, oh, you're absolutely right.
So I have a question for both of you. How do you know when it's time to start a new series, or why? Maybe the other way around is to say, why did your other series end? Did you lose interest? Did the publisher lose interest? What happened, Alan? Because there was a long gap between Fest and
yeah. Well, the Fool's Guild series ended because of the publisher's decision, and I made sure that the last book I left my characters in a good place. With the possibility of starting it up someday, which I haven't. And then I tried to write some other things in between. I have a werewolf book out there that I absolutely adore, and I was hoping that would become a series. I was 90 pages into the second one, and then nope. And I was doing musical theater work, and I did a book that was non-genre and very personal. And, so I was writing other things, and then my editor basically pitched the milieu that I'm working in now. So that's how it came about.
Well, you have an editor of rare acumen and insight. In case he's watching this, Keith, congratulations. Yeah, he's an amazing editor.
I've been with him for 25 years now.
Yeah, well, I've been with him even longer than that, even though I'm not an author. And he's done some. You're not the first author, in fact, who has, after a gap, reinvented himself, with something really different in a different name. So it's great. Ashley, what about you? Why Amory to Ellie?
Well, I'd been talking with my publisher about possibly starting a second series, and then I kind of the idea for Ellie sort of developed, and it just took off from there. So as Alan said, I sort of ended the Amory series is kind of ended in a good place, with the potential of maybe someday something else will happen with that. But right now I'm rolling forward with Ellie. So.
Yeah, well, I think fans often want to know, if they're invested in a series, it can be distressing for fans to, to lose them. And, some of it's a practical decision, but sometimes I think authors have just run out of things to say. about a particular series. But it's very nice when you can wrap it up so that, the reader isn't left wondering what could have happened. It's kind of like, Agatha Christie leaving the final Poirot somewhere in a vault, so
Yeah.
we'd see how that was. Sorry, Patrick, I interrupted again. Anything else?
Let's see here. Let's go over to Facebook. Okay. Jel, I think Jel wants to know, do you ever use the names of people who have annoyed you as the murder victims?
Great question.
I have not personally, no.
Not yet.
That's
Really?
a good answer. Not yet.
No kidding. Wow. Well, I have a question for you. Who are some of your favorite of your peers, that are also writing historical mysteries? There's so many great writers out there in this genre. Who do you like to read?
Well, I just read a good one that's coming out in a couple of months, Mariah Frederick's The Limburg Nanny, which it's really more of a historical novel, but it's about the kidnapping of the Limburg baby, but from the perspective of the historical nanny. And she just gets right into the head and right into the period. And it's one of those books where I'm 5 pages into it and I thought, okay, we're good. This is going to go fine, and it did. So that's one that I liked quite a bit recently.
Two of my very favorite early on when I started reading a lot of historical mystery were Deanna Rayburn and Tasha Alexander. And so I'm still a big fan of both of their books. And I also belong to a group called Sleuths in Time, which is a group of historical authors. And we all write in different time periods. So it's kind of fun. We're kind of a broad spectrum of time periods, but we're all historical, sort of in the cozy vein mysteries. So I enjoy a lot being in that group and being able to kind of interact with all these different authors who enjoy the same things that I do.
Well, I'm a big fan of Deanna's, and she has a new series, which is a contemporary novel, and she's coming to see us. I think it's September 8th, isn't it, Patrick? I think it's the 8th. So I'm unfortunately going to be at BoucherCon in Minneapolis, so I'll miss her, but I'm really pleased about that. And Tasha has a new book out in October, and it takes her cast to Egypt, which she researched by actually going to Egypt and going down the Nile. So that'll be fun to talk to her about that too. It'll be great. Well, guys, it was really a treat to spend time with you again. I'm
So much.
listening to the thunder there. Alan has a big fan in Deborah Crombie, as well as AJ Finn. And I think Deborah's made arrangements to talk to you herself, hasn't she, Alan?
I have to give her a call, but you gave me the info and I will work that out.
It's always nice, to come upon a series and recognize how much you love it. Fortunately, with Ashley, you're only 2 books in, and with Alan, you're only 4, so it doesn't require an enormous commitment, as there were.
Time to read them all, people.
But anyway, let me remind you before we leave, we do have in the store right now autographed copies of The Key to Deceit, and A Peculiar Combination is out in paperback. And I just reordered today the first 3 in the Sparks and Bainbridge series, The Right Sort of Man, A Royal Affair, and A Rogue's Company. And we should probably be getting in the next day or 2 our autographed copies of The Unkept Woman. It's not The Unkempt Woman, although I guess we could make an argument somewhere in there that might be true. Anyway, and the good news is they both turned in another book in the series. So we have that to look forward to next summer, when perhaps they'll even come to see us, which would be really exciting. Anyway, thanks very much for joining us. So night, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nice meeting you, Ashley.
You
Thank
too.
you, Pat.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.